Cool, thank you. All right, so welcome everyone again to the third CPDBE workshop. So just a quick recap. We had 3 workshops, in-country workshops, and we already had 2 webinars following up from each workshop. So the first and the second. If you haven't been to the workshops or the webinars, you can find a written report on our website, as well as the recording from the webinar. Okay, so there's the invitation to catch up on what we've been doing. Today we're going to focus on Mexico. Before I give you a summary of what happened in our workshop in Mexico, I'd like to have a quick recap on what in Brazil. So in our last or the previous webinar, we talked about developing educators, trainers, and mentors. We talked about sustaining communities of practice. We talked about remote CPD, distance learning CPD, and also about how to measure the impact of CPD on student learning. So again, if you've missed it and you're interested in those themes or topics, you can take a look at our website and you'll find the resources over there. Right. Then we had a workshop in Mexico in February, about a month ago, or a little bit over a month ago. So these were the themes that emerged during the workshop. Just as so you know, give you a bit of context, we usually have about 3 presentations, and then we have an open space session whereby people post or propose issues and questions. We take them on Post-it notes, and then we group them and form discussion tables based on what people want to talk about. So there were many issues, but here's just the highlights. So one of the threads we had for this third workshop was to take a look at training versus development, and look at more developmental activities that sometimes do not have the recognition or the validity they deserve. So we looked at from the point of view of school leaders and public administrators and ministries of education and so on, of usually when teachers, or more often than not, when teachers are given the opportunity to engage in professional development, they are given training. So either go to a training center or a university or a hotel conference room and get training from specialists, let's say, or the specialist goes to the school and gives workshops to the teachers, which is perfectly fine and good and useful and beneficial. But we are more interested in looking at developmental activities that are not led by an authority or an expert standing in front of the room to a group of teachers. So we looked at CPD activities that can be done with peers, with online, with mentors and things like that. And how can we, so the question is, how can we make them more visible and so that they can have the recognition they deserve when it comes to large-scale programs, for example, and things like that. So that was one of the key things addressed in this workshop. Another one, which has a lot to do with these first 2, is the cognitive change at the level of beliefs and values. So basically, I'm going to go into this in a minute, but basically what we're talking about here is if teachers are exposed to new approaches or tools or ideas, classroom activities, etc., that is good, but not enough. There needs to have some change for professional development to happen, some change at the level of beliefs and values. So what they believe is good teaching, what is good CPD, what is good learning, and the values that are that underlie the beliefs the teachers have. So that is something very important, and in a minute I'll show you a really nice diagram we can use to understand this better. We also talked about CPD for school leaders, something that usually is lacking, at least in our context here, in our large context in the Americas, especially Latin America. CPD is usually offered to teachers. The question here is, many teachers then become school leaders, and this transition does not usually have the support they need. So the teachers become leaders. That by leaders we mean headmasters or supervisors or coordinators, or anyone in a managerial or leadership position in the school. This transition is not easy, and we identified in our workshops that more support is needed here, because I might be a very good teacher, so academically I have what it takes, but I might not be a good administrator, which is a different area of a different set of skills, basically. So we looked at that and the need for more CPD for school leaders. And one of the main topics addressed in Mexico was for the school leaders as well to be able to help teachers to choose their CPD activities, and to help the teachers identify the needs, their CPD needs, and their strengths and areas for improvement, etc. So this support is essential. And then we also talked about conditions for successful mentoring. We're not going to go into this one today, but there is a whole section in the report that addresses mentoring. Right, so let's talk briefly about CPD for school leaders. So here we have one of the frameworks that the British Council have regarding professional development. This one is for school leaders. There are here the professional practices. So creating strategic direction, leading, teaching, learning, managing resources, developing and working with others, working in partnership. And over here we have enabling skills and professional values and personal commitment. So the idea here, because many times CPD for school leaders is lacking, sometimes we don't even know where to start. So, okay, I'm going to create a program for school leaders. Where do I start? So this is a good starting point. So to have a needs assessment, a needs analysis to begin with, it could be by self-evaluation, peer evaluation, etc. So this is a good stage, a good thing to have. If it has identified that there is a need for a strategic direction, and then where the person or the team is in that scale, this could help a lot. Following that, we also have the enabling skills. Here I have a screenshot of both. So you can probably see it better than in the wheel, in the framework. So here I have the professional practices and the enabling skills. So we talked about, firstly, understanding what is professional development for school leaders and what are the areas. How can we break it down into smaller areas and then start planning or designing programs to focus on each particular area. So I think this would be probably the main takeaway, is understanding how is CPD for school leaders different to CPD for teachers. Right, I won't talk much about this. I would actually like to hear from you. So I would like to firstly invite you to answer this, and then we can also address some comments you have over there in the chat box. I'm going to open a poll here, and I'll invite you to respond. The participants answer. Maybe Graham, you could. I would like to ask you if you could share with us, perhaps, maybe where you worked previously as a teacher and had and coordinators and directors and people above you, or maybe where you are now with your many trips around the Americas looking at teacher development. Which skill do you think are perhaps the most challenging one to develop in a school environment?
It's a very good question, actually, and I'd love to hear from others. But I can definitely say what I think. I think communicating effectively is always something that we can do better wherever we are. I think, especially when my situation is we work in a very distributed network in different countries and different places. But in my experience, even when you're working in a face-to-face situation in the same school, you can have problems communicating effectively with, you know, with people. And I think it's probably because, and maybe I'll ask Catalina to come in and see what she thinks about this, but I think we all get really busy, and quite often people have different timetables. There's very short spaces of time in education when people actually are free to have meetings all together. That makes it difficult, etc. So that, for me, is something you can always improve upon. What about you, Catalina?
Thank you, Graham, for bringing me in. I apologize, I have a little bit of an affected voice this week. No, I agree with you. I think communication is one of those skills that is essential, really, to improve teamwork. It's essential to improve morale. It's essential to improve problem solving. If you can't identify the problem, if you can't communicate that to your colleagues, to your peers, then the effort will possibly just glide in different directions. So I tend to agree with you. I mean, we share the kind of situation of working remotely. Teamwork is essential, but it's also understood differently, perhaps, from people that are in contact day to day. So I think I would agree with you. I also think that morale is an important part, and trying to put myself in the feet of a school leader. I think that is essential. You need to have your team members feel that they can go the extra mile. I think education is about going the extra mile in terms of thinking out of the box. I think I'm looking at the chat, we have Gabriela here saying she teaches at a secondary school and it is difficult to think outside of the box. And I think, yeah, you put your finger on it as well. I think those would be two of my comments at this stage.
Great, yeah, thanks. Just before
All
we move
right.
on, Willy, I'm just sharing the poll results. It's quite interesting to see that the audience that we have today, and there are 38 people joining us from all over the Americas, and maybe even from outside the Americas, think that teamworking is the most critical skill that needs to be improved upon. In a way, communicating effectively is part of that, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with you both. I would say, well, from the last couple of years, I've been visiting schools. I think here, communicating effectively would be an area that definitely has room for improvement. And yeah, followed closely by team working. I think culturally teachers tend to work alone more often than not in their classrooms with their students, but not often with other teachers. And from what I've seen, the opportunities they have to be together are used to talk about, I don't know, the administrative stuff or assessment or things like that. Not very often for professional development. Okay, great. So this is interesting. Good to hear from you guys that you are you can identify that, and then hopefully we can discuss ways in which we can develop these skills further via our forum in the CPDBE community of practice. If you're interested in a description of each one of these professional practices and namely skills, you will find them in the CPD framework for school leaders by the British Council. I can copy and paste the link in a minute here. It's just that I cannot do all of the work, all the functions of Zoom at the same time, but we can do that in a second. Right, so moving on, the other thing I mentioned I wanted to share with you is this idea of professional development having an impact that is at a cognitive level, and mainly at the level of beliefs and values. So here's an interesting thing we briefly mentioned in the previous workshop, but we didn't have the reference, so I picked it up to share this with you here. This comes from Tim Phillips' presentation in Mexico. And basically, as you can read here, it says to get into the black box for teachers and help them understand the black box for learners. What does that mean? So here we provide professional learning opportunities, but each teacher will have their own interpretation of the value of that opportunity and how to use it. So understanding this and helping teachers understand how they interpret that through the lenses of their beliefs, usually, is quite enlightening in terms of professional development. This may lead to a change in practice or no change in practice, but starting from one's awareness of how they interpret that opportunity is a great first step. And then moving on, the same with students. So the teachers will try new activities, strategies, etc. And the students will have their own interpretation of an understanding of that. And again, for the teachers to understand how their students interpret that is also key. For this stage, we also discussed in our workshop, we won't have time really to see it here, but the value of exploratory action research. So this is something we have been talking about in more than one workshop. In our workshops, there's usually someone with a lot of experience in this, and it shows us that it is really incredible. If we want to understand and improve our practice, the first step is to explore the classroom environment and how our students understand it and how our students see our practice, and then to plan for change. So this is a very interesting bit here as well. Again, it may lead to positive changes, to no changes, or to even to negative changes. But including this understanding stage in our planning may give us very good results, if not in terms of student performance, but at least in our understanding of how our classrooms work. The references is here below, and this is also in the report we have just published about the Mexico workshop. Okay, so here's a little thing I wanted to share with you. Right, let's move on, because I want to give Graham a lot of time to go over the online, moving our teaching online. Let's have a very quick discussion here. Right, so the question is, how can less visible or less formal activities, CPD activities, gain more recognition? So here we're talking about, for example, reflective practice via journals maybe. We're talking about communities of practice and mentoring and other activities that are not top-down. So these activities are usually bottom-up or done in collaboration with other people, and they are more difficult to measure. So if you want to measure the impact of a community of practice, it's going to be rather difficult, of mentoring a little bit less so, but still is not a clear-cut way of measuring these things. But I believe we can all agree that they are very, very important in our professional development. So how can we make these gain more recognition so that the investment in professional development is balanced in terms of formal workshops and teacher training and the sort of professional development? Right, so let's take a look here at the chat, see who wants to comment. Also, Graham and Catalina, feel free to jump in, and anyone else who wants to speak on the microphone, not type in the chat, you're also very, very welcome. Just let us know.
One of the things I would say to start off with, while we're waiting for people to think about it, is in a lot of circumstances where I've worked, a lot of contexts where I've worked, teachers require some kind of recognition formally for any CPD they do. So if they go to conference, they need a certificate, they need some kind of evidence that they've taken part in it. That's very difficult to do if it's more informal. So if it's something that they do in their own time, it becomes more difficult to be able to do that or to get that recognized. So that is a problem. What can you do to get around that? I don't know. I think you need sort of a bit of a some kind of recognition system from the school where you work in order to certify that, for example. I don't know, Catalina, again, if you've had any experience of anyone getting around that, or are there any systems that you know about because of your experience with schools across the region where that takes place?
Thanks, Graham. Well, not really. I think it is one of those areas in which it is very difficult to produce that evidence and credible evidence. I think that is an area that perhaps could be explored further as we work with school leaders, for example, how to set up schemes, how to establish schemes inside the school in which that community of practice or the learnings in it can be shared more widely and can actually be identified in the practices that the teachers or school leaders have in their daily routines. Perhaps, as Gabriela was mentioning, and you did put your finger on it as I was thinking, you know, some kind of rubric, some kind of identified indicators would help. So if those community of practices could set those up at the start, so that it does, you know, go beyond the sharing of experiences and it actually conveys the learning. In my view, that would be a way maybe to think about it. But responding your question specifically, no, Graham, I think that is one of those areas that deserves more exploration and deserves you know, attention. Now I see that in the chat there are several people commenting. Perhaps we can read some of those comments.
One of the things that is being said in the chat is if teachers have a portfolio, for example, then that can be evidence that is used that would be formally recognized by the school, which is, you know, a very interesting idea, I think. Some kind of written record with what's been done, what time, etc. It sounds like some of the people in the webinar today say that is recognized, which is good.
Yeah, Renata also mentions, she says, I'm not an expert, but I guess one would need to better publicize the results arising from such activities in workshops, publications, debates, etc., and have some sort of M&E developed to assess these results. I agree with you, Renata. I just think that sometimes this is activity that is undertaken by teachers, you know, because they are interested and they just share activities. So it doesn't necessarily have the format of a project, which is something that, you know, for those colleagues and attendees that are British Council staff, we are more used to seeing life through that lens. But definitely it would require for teachers and possibly those that are more active in this communities of practice, sorry, to introduce some structured approach so that it does benefit them and the scheme and all the members and all the colleagues that participate in that scheme. So maybe helping them understand these type of structures, you know, from the perspective of the British Council, that is an organization that carries out these projects. Maybe we can think about introducing these elements into their way of engaging, you know, into teachers' way of engaging into these communities of practice or reflective practice exercises. I think from the British Council perspective, we have done, I think, more structured approaches to mentoring. And they do introduce elements such as the ones that you've described, Graham, like journals and some kind of reports that will trace that learning and that will provide that evidence of progress. So I think we can learn from that and see how we can bring it into the space of communities of practice. And we'll touch upon this later on in the webinar, but of course this does become even more relevant in COVID-19, the COVID-19 era of virtual learning and some more remote ways of interacting. So so yeah, I would say that.
Thanks, Catalina. Let's hope it's not an era. That makes it sound like it's going to last a very long time. Let's hope it's over very shortly. Although my fear is that it is going to last longer than anyone wants it to.
Sure, for sure. Let's not talk about an era. Let's talk about COVID times. Sure.
Right. Great. Well, thank you all for your contributions here, both live and in the chat box. Right. Fantastic. So I think this goes back to what we discussed in our first webinar, which was having very clear objectives before we start anything, even if the objectives are adapted later on, but having that clear common objective if you're working collaboratively is very important so that you can actually measure it. So hope we can discuss this further as well in the community of practice. I have posted there a framework a colleague of mine designed for peer observation, so that it makes it more visible the sort of development that is happening in a series of peer observation. Let's see, it's all about having diagrams with some graphs and dots, but I assure you they're very easy to understand for us coming from the language humanities field. So take a look at that. It's in our CPDBE community of practice on Slack. Right, I'm going to wrap this up so Graham can share with us his ideas on online teaching. I'd like to close by, again, sharing this is the complete article as well in the community of practice. A very recent study, I think it was published in January 2020 in the UK, which says one of the main outcomes was this: teachers' perceived influence over their professional development goal setting is the area most associated with higher job satisfaction and a greater intention to stay in teaching. So it was a large-scale survey done in the UK, asking teachers about the different aspects of associate with job satisfaction, and having this agency, this autonomy to choose the professional development activities they want to and they need, is the area most associated with them staying in teaching and not leaving. So I'll leave you with this. There's a website for this with a summary of research, and then for those interested, there's a PDF you can download. It's free, it's open access. So here's the link. I'll probably just copy and paste the link in the chat box as well, so you can just go straight to it. Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you very much, and I will now pass it over to Graham.